Let me be the first person to admit something right off the bat. I'm definitely somebody you would consider to be an action game gremlin. I like controlling characters with a giant sword in their hand that has to make moment-to-moment decisions in combat in order to dodge attacks or unleash an ultimate or something of that sort. I'm the kind of guy that'll scream or shriek if something feels really good to use in a video game. And what I find fun in games is of course going to determine what kind of games I play. At all the same time though, games I don't outright enjoy I can still see the value in for other players. I can see the appeal in certain things that I wouldn't normally find fun, even if they're not for me. But there's a consistent genre that I just can't ever mesh with, barring some extremely exclusive exceptions. I'll just come out and say it, I'm not a particularly big fan of MMOs. There's maybe one or two that I actually enjoy playing, and trust me, I have tried. In most cases, I find that it's one part time commitment issue, and then the other part just game feel that I never really liked in the first place. There's a level of separation between me clicking a button and having my character swing their weapon. And I just don't like that. Is that a statement that's going to potentially get me crucified? Yes, absolutely. But like I said, it's not like I haven't tried. Back during the early to mid 2010s, I ended up trying a lot of free-to-play MMOs. And even a handful of paid-for ones. And even if I did see what people liked about those games, they just weren't for me. But through all of my time searching, there has been one genre sort of lost to time that I desperately want to see come back again. One could even make the argument that it's something of a splinter of the MMO genre. I'll stop beating around the bush now, it's online RPGs. Y'all are smart, I mean you probably figured that out already. I assume most of you can read titles of videos. It's weird though, because for me, I kind of feel like that ORPGs and MMOs are pretty ill-defined. Many of their elements definitely bleed together, I feel like. And what game you count as an online RPG, or ORPG for short, is going to depend on who you ask. But for me, it's practically any online multiplayer game that doesn't play like an MMO, but maybe has a similar framing to an MMO. Instead of seeing hundreds of thousands of players in one server, you can only see like 10, 20, 100 of them at a time. This distinction gets more and more weird as time goes on just because there's not really a hardcore definition. And again, the ORPG genre in itself is sort of a genre lost to time. So I think to get a better focus on what these kinds of games are, we need to look at some examples. So let's do just that. But before we move on real fast, I just want to mention, if you're a fan of the character action genre and you haven't played or seen Final Fantasy 16, it's really good. The PC port's kind of a mess right now, but given time, either Square Enix or modders will fix it. It's very good, I would highly recommend, and payday can't come soon enough for me to be able to buy it. Also, Titan as a selectable icon makes me feel a certain way. Can we get another parry just for the road?
Wait a second, I'm getting another signal. It looks like one more managed to disconnect. If you can hear me, you've somehow managed to escape your stasis chamber.
One of the agents who broke you out appears to have survived the blast. Speak with him and he may be able to get you out of there. You don't have much time.
Okay, so, I suppose a good enough place to start is to try our best to define what an ORPG is. I say try because I want to establish something right off the bat here. I'm not necessarily an authority on this subject. I didn't grow up playing any of these games. I want to come at this video sort of as an outsider looking in. And a lot of the framing for this video is going to act as something of a post-mortem for a lot of these games. In other words, I am not the target audience here. But I want to be. Many of the examples we're going to be looking at today are a little before my time. But I definitely still think that there's value in this genre if it were to come back in some form. Let's jump right back to that first question for a sec. If you ask me, as somebody who has had very little experience with this genre, I would consider any ORPG to be a game that is framed like an MMO but plays distinctly differently. Instead of having abilities on a cooldown or something on your hotbar, gameplay can instead be facilitated by what you would normally see in another genre. For instance, the game pictured here is Global Agenda. This game plays distinctly like a third-person shooter instead of a more traditional MMO. Things on your hotbar in this game instead act like more traditional equipment. It's here where you'll select things like weapons or equipment pieces in order to facilitate the combat. It'll be things like selecting an assault rifle in order to do the moment-to-moment fights. And your quote-unquote abilities are things like popping a shield or using a grenade. These abilities or skills still have a cooldown function, and they do pull from some sort of global mana bar-esque system. But again, the gameplay itself is framed differently. Like in a more typical third-person shooter, you have to worry about spacing and cover, for example. Unlike MMOs, there's a focus on movement as well. This is primarily facilitated by the use of a jetpack that is given to every class. But remember, this is still an ORPG. You have options for different kinds of equipment. Later down the line in your gameplay, you might come across a jetpack that has a longer flight time or faster velocity or something. And of course, like most games of its ilk, your weapons follow largely the same rules. You even have different kinds of weapons to pick from too in the same class. And I'm sure you can tell that all of this just better helps the gameplay that this game is going for. When you're in the middle of combat, you have to make quick decisions. Things like the moving around and spacing, you gotta create distance, you gotta close the gap. You might need to heal your friend as a medic. You might need to hold the line as an assault. There's a clump of enemies in the corner absolutely begging for a rocket from your rocket launcher. Maybe you want a huge advantage immediately and you use a sniper rifle as a recon. Or maybe, as a recon, you'd prefer to stealth in, get some backstabs with your melee weapon, which doesn't consume energy. And again, have their own stats. And like everything else, there's different reasons why you would want to pick up one melee weapon versus another. It's all of these things working together that helps sets this game apart from other things you would consider an MMO normally. To the point where, hopefully, if you agree, I consider it to be a different genre. The game doesn't play like an MMO, it just kind of feels like one. All without having the things that would normally make it an MMO, which is precisely why I like it a lot more. Traditional MMOs have something of a learning curve, or maybe just an enjoyment curve. If you've played MMOs with other people before, there's a high likelihood that you came across a conversation where, if you're going through the game, basically the whole game is a tutorial until you get to max level or something, or some other vaguely arbitrary point. The problem for me is that most of the times that statement is true for MMOs, which at that point then undercuts the hook of the game itself. It's things like, oh, this game has this, this, and this, but you can't do any of that yet because you're still level 10. And that's kinda lame. Progression and earning your way into the better parts of the game is of course going to be important for any game period. But for me and many other people, the basic gameplay loop needs to be enjoyable in and of itself for us to actually be hooked by the game. There's something of an ugly Groundhog Day scenario whenever you first start up an MMO. Especially if you jump into one immediately after. They feel kinda the same until you get further into it. And it's almost always the case where you need to sink a lot of hours into an MMO in order to actually see what sets that game apart. It can make so many of these games' gameplay look more like a laundry list cookie cutter sort of situation. And if you're trying to get a new player's foot in the door, I think it goes a long way with making the opening early parts of the game enjoyable to their own merit. A game can start off on the right foot by just having completely different gameplay to its peers. Have the combat immediately catch your attention. Or if nothing else, just have it be fun and satisfying. Of course I want people to focus on things like build crafting and customization, but if the gameplay doesn't start out enjoyable and interesting, well then there's not really much of an initial hook there. Global Agenda definitely shows its age in a whole lot of ways. But even in the year 2024, it still sets itself apart from other games that it's competing with. But this isn't our only example. There's a whole bunch of ways to make an online RPG. And if you're a real old head that's been around the block for a whole minute, then I don't think the next example is going to surprise you any. The Phantasy Star series is a big deal when it comes to this discussion. There are many people, including me, who consider this game to be something of a poster child for ORPGs, kind of in general. This, at one point, Japanese exclusive game was such a big deal that a bunch of modders came together and made an English patch for the game so American players, or just English-speaking players in general, could also play and enjoy the game. And the biggest reason for this is possibly just the gameplay. Once again, it has everything you could ever want out of an MMO. Character progression, skill unlocking, new equipment, varied class structure, and once upon a time, a regular update cycle that always had new stuff coming in. I'm gonna be entirely honest. If I kept talking about what made Phantasy Star Online cool, then we would be here until the sun exploded. Just know that every game that I mentioned here, while it is a niche, there are, I kid you not, thousands of players who really like these games. Both because initially getting into the game is super interesting, but also because as time went on for these games, there was just more and more stuff to do. There was so much variance in the maps or modes or just anything you can sink your time into. The more that they added, the more that things just sort of felt fresh as time went on. There was always something to do, and for the most part, a lot of it was fun for different reasons. And for most of these games, to have it to where all of these things was bundled into one package, it meant that these games were sort of gigantic in their scope. There was always something to look forward to do. Leveling up the classes in PSO2 until you unlocked things like the hero class, it's not just that you had to unlock it by doing a bunch of work, it was that being a veteran actually felt like a gameplay mechanic. Hero in specific sort of felt like, oh well, you've played all of the basic classes already, now you get to play as all of them at once kinda. And Hero is not the only class that does this. Like I keep saying, there was a lot more to look forward to. An infinite amount of things, almost. And the road to enjoyment and progress was paved in the basic gameplay loop. Both in here and in other games, it's one of those easy to pick up, hard to master kind of things. But the mastery was rewarding. While somehow never really feeling like a slog. Along the way you would have these different story chapters that would have you playing completely different games almost. And even something like customization plays a huge part in that. MMOs sort of get the benefit of being a play space where you can make memories with other players. But history has shown us with games like these that that's not a thing that is unique to MMOs. These games can do that too. And every so often they get that same effect. It just goes to show you that even if you haven't played any of these games before, hopefully you'll start to understand why the player bases for these games were so passionate. But we do have something of a problem here. Any conversation where you talk about these games in the current day, this particular topic is always going to rear its ugly head one way or another. As it currently stands, these games are either dead or dying. Whether it be through a lack of player interest over the years, or devs simply shutting down the server, one thing remains clear. These games simply can't be played anymore. At least, not really in the way they were fully intended. The Phantasy Star series came out with Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, which is a mouthful of a title, and I don't know, I heard it was fine, except for not really, everybody seems to hate it. I certainly didn't stick with it for very long. And Global Agenda's whole situation is just kinda sad, because like, the game is delisted, but if you have the right link, you can still play the game, it's just it doesn't get updates anymore, and there's hardly anybody online. It wouldn't be hyperbole to say that the game's basically on life support. That being said, if you do want to play the game because you missed it or whatever, it'll be in the description. You're welcome, by the way. And just for the sake of mentioning it too, Even publishers like Capcom have sort of dabbled in this particular field of video games. Two immediate things that come to mind are Monster Hunter Frontier and Dragon's Dogma Online, both of which are being sort of spearheaded by the communities that played these games in the first place. Which, at least in those cases, I'm glad that there's at least a little something going on for them. The point is that there's always something that's going to get in the way of these games. They're going to shut down eventually. And that's true for basically any game that is online gameplay first. If the game has servers that are being owned by the company that make the game or publish the game, then eventually they're going to stop supporting it, and it's almost always going to be a sad day for the players. For the devs too, if they are passionate about it. And even in the case of fan servers who try to keep the game alive, the truth is that eventually somebody's going to stop caring, and that's going to be the end of it. What needs to be done in order for this to be less of a sad thing we all have to face is that somebody has to carry the torch. Not just with reviving servers or whatever, but with making brand new experiences. And luckily, we have a couple of those too. And so for this last segment, I would like to posit some examples of modern ORPGs that have in their own way sort of carried the torch. And in all the same vein, maybe we can use what we've learned in the past to make something completely brand new, and continue to push the medium forward. Okay, so can I vent for a minute? Obviously the background footage for this segment was just a bunch of trailers for PSO2. And that's because I tried to get B-roll using my own footage and my own character. But for some reason or another, it was just the most annoying thing I've had to deal with in a long time. As it currently stands, PSO2 can be downloaded from any number of website you can think of. Any number of video game platform you can think of, really. I'm talking Epic Games, I'm talking Steam, I'm talking the Windows Store, all kinds of platforms, arguably too many. I had an issue arise pretty immediately whenever I first started to download PSO2, and basically having it to where I couldn't see my characters anywhere. I tried several versions of the game, and that, coupled with my terrible internet over here, means that I couldn't be able to actually check where my characters were until the next day, basically, because it took that long to download. So, I'm gonna be honest, I just eventually gave up. I said to myself, okay, you know what? Footage of trailers and stuff will be perfectly fine. I don't really care to get actual footage of it at this point. You can get the point. It's fine. And no, I know that's not exactly a problem with Sega or the PSO2 team or anything. That was a bunch of weird outstanding issues that I had uniquely in my case. But considering everybody else is doing it, I'm just gonna blame it on New Genesis because it basically killed base PSO2 anyway, and that's the popular thing to do right now. I will apologize to all of you for not getting the proper footage that could best convey the game, but again, I had a lot of problems with it. And whoever at Sega decided to make it to where characters don't carry over from one platform to another deserves to choke on an egg. Okay, anyway, sorry. Just needed to get that out of the way. Let's move on to the more positive stuff now. And thank you for humoring me.
Operator, incoming transmission. It's from Fortuna.
Warframe is a lot of things. Part third-person shooter, part third-person movement shooter, and even optional modes for like a roguelike, or even a fighting game, or even a snowboarding sports game. In small parts, admittedly, for all of those, but nonetheless, you can see where I'm going with this. You might not agree that this game kind of counts as an MMO, and that's fair. But what it is a third-person shooter with so many systems that is framed like an MMO once again. Admittedly, the game isn't perfect. I have problems with many of its systems and how it portrays itself. And at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it was inspired by games like PSO2 or Global Agenda. But its origins are rooted in that time frame. Even with all of its modernization updates and such, it still has a lot of that ancient DNA from the early 2000s. And that is precisely what makes the game so wonderful. I'll be honest and say that I kind of struggle to even call this game an online RPG. If only because it sets itself so apart from everything else that it kind of doesn't work with that definition anymore. But even still, maybe it counts as an evolution of that genre. Or maybe even more accurately, a mutation of that genre. In my mind, I sort of consider ORPGs to already be mutations of MMOs anyway. Not necessarily an upgrade, but definitely still pushing the envelope. But in their own way, that doesn't necessarily detract from the originating genre in a way. If nothing else, Warframe has all of the hallmarks to make an ORPG what it is. You've got the build crafting, you've got the playing with numbers, you have the updates and missions that occasionally stray away from its existing genre. And most importantly, it does not stick with the typical MMO conventions. There's a lot to look forward to in Warframe. Anywhere you look, the further you play, there's always going to be more stuff to do. There's always ways to progress. There's always ways to make your character stronger. And, thankfully, there's over a decade's worth of content to comb through. Even as I'm putting down the script for this video right now, there's a new update pushing out new content and a new character to play as. But the game, of course, isn't without its faults. It takes a good long while to make any actual sizable progress in Warframe, especially if you're just starting out. And yeah, admittedly, it can get pretty daunting to try to pick up and play. But, on the bright side, it is completely free. Much like so many games of its ilk. This has been always sort of a weird thing for me, because Warframe always came off as a game that originated from a time long past, at least long past in the wider gaming scene, but it kept those traditions and adapted them to a modern audience, and continues to do so to this very day. I'm trying really hard to not make this like an ad read or anything, because no, my tiny channel doesn't get any sponsorships or anything. So I'll just come out and say it. The game is basically always looking for new players to try to join in and enjoy it, really. In fact, as of right now, until the 16th of October, you can get a free character to play as, just for logging into the game. And if you're watching this video further in the future, then sorry, sucks to suck, but it's no longer available. But even still, at the end of the day, the game is still free and there's still stuff to look forward to. I genuinely think there's no harm in picking it up and trying it just to see if you're interested. It's not even PC exclusive nowadays, you can play it on just about anything, really. And of course, as a YouTuber, I'm obligated to do some YouTuber shilling for a minute. I have a video talking about how to roughly get into Warframe as a newbie from a newbie. It's a pretty old video by this point, but if you need some pointers on how to get in, I genuinely still think it's pretty worth it to take a look. It's all just kind of magical to me because Warframe is still so much of just a big thing. A lot of its magic is just the same old online RPG magic that I've kind of been talking about. It's still here and it's modernized, and I don't think it's gonna go anywhere anytime soon. So I mean, hey, if you're interested, then why not give it a look? I think it's definitely worth a try. Also, just for the sake of saying it, because some people got it kinda wrong in that first Warframe video, I am not a Warframe YouTuber, I'm not a Warframe YouTuber, I'm not a Warframe YouTuber, I'm not a Warframe YouTuber, I never want to be. I am perpetually a newbie at this game, and I'll probably continue to be 5 or 10 years whenever I continue to play the game. But hey, maybe it just speaks to how much there is to do in this game. The fact that I keep finding new stuff to do, and new stuff to talk about, and new stuff to be new at. And I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. But maybe Warframe really isn't your kind of thing. And that's okay. I've got one more thing we can try. Something completely different. So, our last game here might seem like it gives off kind of a weird first impression. But I promise that if you just stick with me here for a sec, I think this game does have its merits. Let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. Right, okay, so I should probably explain myself a little bit. Let me start off by answering a question that's probably on everybody's mind.
This isn't like a Gooner game, is it?
No, at least I don't believe so. At least it's not any worse than what you would typically find in older ORPGs anyway. Trust me when I say that there is a lot of care and attention put into this game. Even if the first impression leaves you kinda confused. I should probably say the name of the game, huh? This is Atlas, by the way, and it's a free demo that you can get on h.io. Long story short, my discovery of this game was sort of random and out of the blue. I got so bored that I just decided to run around h.io to find something to play. And oh hey, what do you know? A game that literally is inspired by PSO2. Or at least just the Phantasy Star series in general. It's weird to see just how much polish and care is put into the game immediately just in its short little demo, especially considering it's being spearheaded by a single solo developer. The gameplay is fast and frenetic, and the demo just in and of itself gives you a pretty good idea of what the game is going to pan out to be. I'm sort of using this last segment here to once again tease a future video, if or when Atlas ever fully comes out, or at least full enough to be able to show off to people and go, hey look, this is really cool and you can play it with your friends. Because specifically as of right now, the multiplayer is turned off for these demos. And yeah, I know, even though this is supposed to be an ORPG, there's not really any O happening. The game isn't online yet. But really the point of this segment was to just kind of show games that are up and coming that fall into the vein of ORPGs. Current stuff, you know, and that means also games that aren't fully out yet but show a lot of promise. Which is the reason I even show this right now anyway. There's like platformer elements here along with the fast combat. And once you get to level 10, you get skills for your class that benefit not only the combat, but also exploration and other things that you would want in a game like this. If you want to get better at the platforming and use that to your advantage, then you can pick the bandit class. If you want to spec into magic range, then you have a bunch of spells facilitating all of that too. And even some stuff that's like support oriented. The fighter class similarly benefits a lot of how the combat system works. It's a lot of dodging in and out and weaving through the combat. Ways to make space or close the gap, and all that other good stuff that we really like about ORPGs. And it's even more interesting because there is only 3 classes in Atlas. All of the classes feel distinct and fleshed out, at least for the length of the demo. And I have hopes going forward that the full game is going to be like this too. More things for your class to do, and more ways for your class to feel unique and special from everybody else. I haven't even mentioned the weapons yet, and the weapons can get crazy. They're all distinct and unique from one another, all having different things you can do in combat with them, what roles they would pick and what they're capable of. Spin attacks, thrusting attacks, all kinds of stuff, just so many things. There really is a surprising level of competency with this game, and I really hope it does pan out to be everything that we would ever want it to be. It's on a good track record if nothing else. Seemingly it gets a new update like every couple of weeks. And it's precisely games like these that give me real hope for the genre. And I don't know, man, I just think that's worth something. Honestly, go try the demo, it'll be linked in the description. And hey, if you're not interested in it right now, then why not subscribe and stick around? We might be taking a look at this game further in the future. And hopefully sooner than later. And hey, while you're down there, why not check out the Patreon or join the Discord? Joining the Patreon for $1 a month will get your name read out loud at the end of these videos, and give you access to an exclusive channel in the Discord. But the Discord itself is free. If you just want to hang out or whatever, that's cool. Drop a like if you liked the video, and comment what kind of ORPGs that you miss. Oh man, I meant to talk about Spiral Knights. Yeah, sorry, forgot about that. I meant to make that a whole section. Sorry, Spiral Knights fans, but honorable mention at the very end, I guess. And yeah, I guess that's it. I miss ORPGs, but thankfully there does seem to be a future for them, and for that, I am glad. Hope you have a good day, everybody, and thank you for watching.